In the year 1167, the city of Alexandria, Egypt, a long-standing center of economic and cultural significance, faced a huge threat as a powerful Crusader army surrounded its walls from the south, while a heavily armored naval fleet blockaded the city from the north. In the chaos and insecurity, a young commander of 28 years stood strong with his just 1,000 loyal fighters. The city's supply lines were cut off, and constant attacks of stones through catapults battered its defenses. It caused fear and desperation among the people. Despite the overwhelming odds, the commander's strong leadership and unbreakable spirit changed everything. For 3 tough months, he used his smart tactics to keep the city safe and together. As most people of the city were merchants and resources were running low due to the blockade, hope was fading. However, his perseverance and military skill became a beacon of hope for the people. His inspiring presence and decisive actions rallied the defenders. Eventually, the besieging forces lost hope, realized they couldn't defeat such a strong opponent, and offered a peace agreement. At last, chaos ended. Alexandria stood unbowed, thanks to the young commander's heroism. He emerged from a siege as both a savior and a legend. Even his enemies honored him as a knight, recognizing his bravery and leadership. This was not just a victory for the city, but the start of a struggle of this legendary warrior against crusade wars, which would last for 200 years. He was none other than Sultan Salahuddin Al Ayyubi, the Muslim commander, founder of the Ayyubid dynasty, and conqueror of Jerusalem. He recaptured the third holiest mosque in Islam, which had been under Crusader control for 88 years, and further established his reputation as one of the greatest military leaders of all time. It was November 1095. Pope Urban II delivered a speech in the city of Clermont, France, motivating his audience to stand up and embark on a holy war to conquer the holy city of Jerusalem. His call sparked a massive response, and soon an enormous army of 100,000 people, including men, women, and children, set out on a journey to conquer Jerusalem. This marked the beginning of a bloody era that would last for 200 years. By July 15, 1099, the Crusaders had taken over Jerusalem and along with surrounding territories, where 4 new Crusader states were established: the County of Edessa, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. At that time, the Crusaders were united under the cross, while the Muslims were engaged in internal conflicts. With Jerusalem now under their control, the Crusaders worked hard to strengthen their hold on Syria and Palestine. This new power upset the balance in the Muslim world, which was already facing difficulties. Baghdad, the headquarters of the Abbasid Caliphate, was on the brink of falling apart. The Seljuk Empire, which had been under control under the Abbasid Caliphate, began to break down. At the same time, Egypt's Fatimid Caliphate was facing serious problems and losing power. In this chaotic time, both sides were preparing for big conflicts. The Crusaders had to defend their new territories and deal with resistance from local Muslim forces. On the other hand, Muslim leaders were trying to unite their divided lands and fight back to reclaim what was lost. Imad-ad-Din Zengi, the father of Nur-ad-Din Zengi, struck back for the first time and conquered the county of Edessa in 1144. This was the first resistance from Muslims after the fall of Jerusalem. The Pope and European kings became frustrated with this situation and strategically decided to launch the Second Crusade, which lasted from 1147 to 1149. The King of Germany and the King of France laid siege to Damascus. At that time, Reynald, the father-in-law of Nur-ad-Din Zengi, was the governor of Damascus. When he heard the drums of war, he came into the Jamia Masjid of Damascus with the Holy Quran. This particular scripture was not just any Quran, but the one associated with Uthman bin Affan radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the third caliph of Muslims, who was killed while reciting it, and it still bore his blood. It holds emotional value for Muslims for all time. He delivered a war sermon and said they would not allow the Quran to fall into the hands of the Crusaders, as it had been moved from Jerusalem at the time of the fall of Jerusalem. He declared jihad, and the people of the city began preparations to counterattack. They showed strong determination and perseverance against the Crusaders. But at the same time, Mu'inuddin sent a request for aid to his son-in-law, Nuruddin, the governor of Aleppo, and to his nephew Salahuddin, the governor of Mosul. They responded swiftly, but he didn't wait for support. He started to address the danger with intelligent diplomacy and military tactics. Soon before they reached, the Crusaders retreated without achieving their strategic goals. The Second Crusade ended. This event uplifted the morale of the Muslims. Now Muslims had no immediate threat of another crusade. Nuruddin, the famous Muslim warrior, decided to strengthen his dynasty. He started to expand his empire and developed his army. But on the other hand, in Cairo, Egypt, the Fatimid Caliphate was also struggling with serious political problems, even though Egypt was an economic hub at that time. The real administrative power generally lay in the hands of the prime minister, who was responsible for the day-to-day governance of the country. In 1167, Shawar, who had lost his position as prime minister, asked Nuruddin for help to regain his job. Shawar promised that if Nuruddin helped him, he would give him 1/3 of Egypt's annual income. This offer was too appealing to ignore, so Nuruddin mobilized a force to provide the necessary support. However, once Shawar was in position, he failed to keep his promise. His promise was nothing more than empty words. Nuruddin wasn't happy with the situation. He decided it was time to take decisive action and make a real change. Nuruddin declared war and advanced troops to conquer Egypt, but Prime Minister Shawar sought help from King Amalric of Jerusalem, who was already looking to penetrate Egypt. This was a golden opportunity for him, so he went to help Shawar. But the Muslims of Egypt, who don't like Crusaders, weren't pleased about this new alliance. Nuruddin appointed Asaduddin Shirkuh, a Kurdish warrior, as commander for this adventure. Shirkuh was a brave commander. He was renowned for his remarkable courage in battle. He crafted his war strategy and also decided to take his nephew along, whom he had always admired and personally trained. That nephew was none other than the daring warrior Salahuddin Al Ayyubi. Finally, Shirkuh and his companions fought well and expelled the Crusaders from Egypt. Later on, the Fatimid Caliph appointed Shirkuh as prime minister, but he died within 2 months. Salahuddin was the most prominent leader after Shirkuh, so the Caliph appointed Salahuddin Al Ayyubi as Prime Minister of Egypt. This was the first time Salahuddin gained some political influence. However, this position was not a bed of roses for him. He faced numerous challenges that tested his abilities and helped him develop the skills necessary for achieving greater goals. Salahuddin soon encountered opposition from the internal establishment, which viewed him as an outsider. The Egyptian military, which was predominantly composed of Armenian and Ethiopian soldiers, faced a significant revolt by the Ethiopian soldiers. Yet, Salahuddin, with his natural leadership and commanding abilities, managed to bring them under control. Now Egypt was fully under Salahuddin's command, but solving one problem often led to another. On one hand, Salahuddin had to show loyalty to the Fatimid Caliphate as the prime minister. On the other hand, Nuruddin demanded that Salahuddin prove his loyalty to him by undertaking a major task, which was not an easy task. Nuruddin demanded that Salahuddin abolish the Fatimid Caliphate and declare Egypt under the Abbasid Caliphate. As Nuruddin was also under the Abbasid Caliphate, this task was challenging because the people of Egypt loved the Fatimid Caliphate, and the Fatimid Caliphate had its history, and the ground reality was not in favor of this transition. Salahuddin requested time and prolonged the issue through various means, which ultimately led to a complex relationship with Nuruddin Zengi. As the situation grew increasingly complex between Salahuddin and Nuruddin Zengi, in 1171, the young and final Fatimid Caliph Al-Adid got ill and finally passed away. He had no successor, so Salahuddin, the nominal prime minister, took over the full control of Egypt and became the real master of Egypt. The Fatimid Caliphate, which lasted from 909 CE to 1171 CE, was abolished permanently. Salahuddin then officially began the khutbah in the name of the Abbasid Caliphate in the mosques of Egypt, which was the symbolic sign of subordination and affiliation. As Salahuddin had a strategic mindset and was acutely aware of the political situation in the Middle East, he began to strengthen his control over Egypt by recruiting loyal soldiers into his army. He also focused on revitalizing the economy and initiating many welfare projects for the people of Egypt. He also announced the conversion of numerous government buildings for the welfare of the public, which further strengthened his local support. These efforts helped him gain popularity among the people of Egypt, who began to admire and love him. Primarily, it was a time of relative peace. Muslims had a peace agreement with the Crusaders. The Zengi dynasty was strengthening its power under Nur-ad-Din, and Salahuddin was also building up his rule in Egypt. On May 15, 1174, a messenger arrived and announced Nur-ad-Din Mahmud, the Sufi king and Mujahid of Islam who had united Muslim Syria and the Arabs against the Crusaders, had died. On that day, Muslims across the globe came together in their communities to offer prayers for him. The biggest weakness of the Zengi Empire was the lack of a powerful successor. On the throne of Nur-ad-Din, Al-Salih Ismail was installed at just 11 years of age. The management of the government fell into the hands of courtiers who were involved in palace conspiracies to get power, which ultimately led to rebellions within the Zengi Empire. The empire's situation was getting worse day by day. Although there was a peace agreement with the Crusaders, they were always a constant threat for Muslims. On the other side, internal disintegration and opportunistic revolts were further destabilizing the realm. Nur-ad-Din's widow saw what was going on and noticed how the courtiers were manipulating her son. So she decided to take action. She called upon Salahuddin to take over Damascus for the greater benefit of the Muslims. Salahuddin, who already commanded a strong army and had solid control over Egypt, agreed to march on Damascus. However, he faced strong opposition at first, but the Ayyubid army was stronger, more powerful, and disciplined than the Zengi forces. Eventually, a peace agreement was reached. It was decided that from Aleppo to Mosul, the area would stay under Zengi control, while the rest would be under Ayyubid control. This agreement allowed Salahuddin to end the nominal subordination to the Zengis, and later he also declared himself an independent ruler. Furthermore, he replaced Al-Salih's name on coins and instruments with his own. By doing this, he asserted his authority and marked the start of a new era. The Abbasid Caliphate also recognized his rule. In 1181, Al-Salih fell ill and died. 18 months later, in June 1183, Salahuddin occupied Aleppo. He also tried to conquer Mosul under Zengis, but at last, Salahuddin signed agreements with the rulers there. Later on, they had a good relationship and also helped Salahuddin in many events. The Zengi dynasty continued to rule Mosul until 1250. By 1181, Salahuddin ruled all of the Middle East except Mosul and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. In just 10 years from 1171 to 1181, he dismantled two major empires and established the Ayyubid Empire. Now, Salahuddin was free to plan his next target, Jerusalem. He called upon Muslims far and wide to unite and prepare for jihad. He invited every believer to join in the fight for their cause and reclaim their holy land. It's also claimed that it was Nur-ad-Din's dream to reclaim Bayt al-Maqdis, for which he had built a very fine artistic minbar, pulpit. He even declared with great hope that one day it would be placed in Masjid al-Aqsa. Salahuddin knew about this, so once he took control of Damascus, he gave a speech and said, "Who will conquer Bayt al-Maqdis? Who will oust the Crusaders from Masjid al-Aqsa? If anyone comes forward, I will call him my king. Soon the time will come when I will place Nur-ad-Din's minbar in Masjid al-Aqsa with my own hands." The liberation of Bayt al-Maqdis was not only Nur-ad-Din's dream, but also my parents'. There is no one in this world who can stop me from achieving this." However, there was no walk in the park, and Salahuddin had a mountain to climb to make his mark in history. In November 1177, Sultan Salahuddin Al Ayyubi received intelligence that a significant portion of the Crusader army was away from Jerusalem. He took this as a golden opportunity. He decided it was the right time to launch an attack on the city. However, the Crusaders soon learned of Salahuddin's plans. While on the way to launch a surprise attack, Sultan Salahuddin and his army were surprised by the Crusaders near Talas Jar, close to Ramallah. At that time, the king of Jerusalem was the 15-year-old Baldwin IV. Sultan Salahuddin bore a lot of damage and realized that he needed to gather more strength and strategize further to effectively counter the Crusaders. He began to gather more resources, strengthen, and discipline his army. While the Sultan was focused on his mission, in 1182, he received news that one of the Crusaders' troops was planning to attack Mecca and Medina. This troop was commanded by Salahuddin's worst enemy, Reynald of Hattin. Reynald had been the ruler of Antioch from 1153 to 1160. But in 1160, Nuruddin Zengi conquered Antioch and imprisoned Reynald in Aleppo for 14 years. In 1174, he was released for a huge ransom and went to Jerusalem, where he was appointed commander for the fortress of Al-Karak. Al-Karak was a strategic location between Damascus and Cairo. Many Muslim trade and pilgrim caravans needed to travel near the Al-Karak fortress. Reynald began to take advantage of the situation, even though the peace agreement was in place. Reynald began robbing pilgrims and trade caravans passing near the fort, and his influence was such that even the king could do nothing against him. This made Reynald overconfident. One day, he decided to attack the Hijaz, the holy cities of Muslims, Mecca and Medina. He managed to assemble a fleet of 5 ships for the mission. He started his journey, and while on the Red Sea, he robbed many trade ships and attacked Muslim coastal areas. As a result, news of his actions quickly spread throughout the Muslim world. As he neared the Hijaz, he was tracked by the Egyptian naval commander Hussam ad-Din Lulu. Since Egypt was under Salahuddin's rule, Salahuddin ordered Hussam to take immediate action. Hussam ad-Din defeated Reynald's forces and captured his ships, but Reynald managed to escape back to the Al-Karak castle. Despite this severe defeat, Reynald did not learn his lesson and continued his raids and covert activities. Finally, Salahuddin decided to attack the Al-Karak fortress. He laid siege to it, but forces from Jerusalem came to its aid. Salahuddin carefully assessed the situation and waited for the right moment to advance. It was 1185 CE when King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem succumbed to leprosy, and shortly after, Baldwin V also passed away. Then Baldwin V's stepfather Guy de Lusignan succeeded him as king. Reynald of Hattin used his strong influence to secure Guy's ascension to the throne. In return, the new king gave Reynald full support and free rein to attack Muslim territories. In 1186, Reynald robbed a caravan of pilgrims and captured many Muslims, blatantly violating the agreement between the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Ayyubid Empire. At that time, Reynald crossed the line and mocked, "You believe in Muhammad. Why don't you ask him to set you free?" When Salahuddin Ayyubi heard these words, he swore to kill Reynald with his own hands. Salahuddin decided not only to conquer Al-Karak, but also to take the entire kingdom of Jerusalem. In March 1187, Salahuddin launched a massive operation against the Crusaders. He called for armies from Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and all his subordinate and allied commanders to gather in Damascus. Finally, he marched with his mighty force toward Jerusalem. Strategically, Salahuddin decided to first target the Al-Karak fortress, knowing that the Crusaders would come to its aid. On the other hand, the Crusaders, also seeking a decisive victory, began preparations for battle. Soldiers from all regions joined the king's forces, and by the king's order, the true cross was also brought with them. The Crusaders believed they could not lose as long as they had the true cross, which they considered sacred because it contained a piece of the wood on which Jesus alayhi salam was crucified. In June 1187, the Crusader army set up camp northwest of Nazareth in the present-day city of Sepphoris. Despite the heat, the location was ideal due to the availability of fresh water and fruit gardens. The Crusader army consisted of 1,200 knights and 18,000 infantry. Soon, Salahuddin Ayyubi also arrived at the battlefield with a massive army of 12,000 cavalry and thousands of infantry, encamping at Hattin to the east of Sepphoris. The Muslim encampment at Hattin had significant advantages, with the Sea of Galilee to the east providing drinking water, fish to eat as well as nearby gardens. The distance between the two forces was 17 kilometers, and there was no water or shelter in between. Salahuddin strategically planned to fight at Hattin, while the Crusaders preferred their location. Soon, Reynald of Chatillon joined the Crusader army after the siege of Al-Karak and pressured King Guy to fight at Hattin, but Raymond of Tripoli opposed his plan. As an intelligent commander, he carefully analyzed the war situation. He knew that if they moved to Hattin, it would lead to severe shortages of water and food, while Salahuddin would be well-resourced. This would make the battle extremely difficult for the Crusaders. But King Guy de Lusignan ignored Raymond's advice and agreed with Reynald. The decision would prove to be a significant blunder with dire consequences later on. On July 3, 1187, the Crusader army began their journey to Hattin. They soon realized their mistake as the burning sun began to take its toll. The soldiers, wearing heavy iron armor, were sweating a lot and quickly ran out of water. They were in a bad situation. Salahuddin decided to add to their problems. He ordered his cavalry to shoot arrows at the Crusaders from a distance, which further demoralized them. Finally, the Crusaders reached Hattin. They were desperate for water. Everyone was just looking for a sip of water, but Salahuddin's cavalry continuously targeted them. By evening, the Crusader army was a mess, and everyone was shouting for water from their tents. Salahuddin knew they would meet them in the morning, so he appointed some of his cavalry to continue attacking the Crusaders throughout the night, not letting them sleep. Even at midnight, Salahuddin told his soldiers to start a fire around the Crusaders' camps. The smoke and heat filled the air, making it even harder for the already thirsty and restless soldiers to survive. On the morning of July 4th, Salahuddin stood before the Crusaders with all his might and announced the takbir. But the Crusader army was restless and desperate for water. When they saw Salahuddin's army fresh and full of resources, they became even more demotivated. Salahuddin was confident and believed in Allah, so he ordered the attack. Soon, part of the Crusader infantry fled while the rest struggled to fight the Muslims. King Guy de Lusignan and a few knights with the True Cross fought bravely, but the Muslim army quickly overpowered them, killing the knights and imprisoning King Guy. They also captured the True Cross. When the soldiers saw the loss of the True Cross, it affected them psychologically. They lost their will to fight. At last, Salahuddin emerged victorious in the Battle of Hattin. The Sultan dismounted his horse and prostrated with wet eyes, giving thanks for the victory. King Guy de Lusignan, Reynald, several Crusader leaders, and thousands of Crusader soldiers were taken prisoners. Every Muslim soldier had at least one Crusader captive. After the battle, King Guy and Reynald were brought before the Sultan. The Sultan presented a cold bowl of water to King Guy. According to Arab traditions, offering food and drink to a prisoner symbolized granting them peace. King Guy knew about this. He took some water and passed the bowl to Reynald. But the Sultan immediately said, "I did not offer water to Reynald. He has no peace from my side." Salahuddin then faced Reynald and said, "Twice I swore to kill you. Once when you intended to attack our holy cities, and again when you robbed our caravan." He drew his sword and beheaded Reynald. King Guy began to tremble, fearing for his own life. But Sultan Salahuddin said, "Kings do not kill kings." King Guy, along with other prisoners, was sent to prison. In the Battle of Hattin, about 30,000 Crusaders were killed, while the Muslim losses were minimal. Now, Salahuddin can advance to take control of the entire kingdom of Jerusalem. Within 2 months, he had conquered all territories except for Jerusalem itself. Thousands of Muslim prisoners were freed. Salahuddin transformed the principal mosque of Acre, which had been turned into a church by the Crusaders, back into a mosque and offered Friday prayers there. Now, Salahuddin advanced towards Jerusalem, the holy city for which Muslims and Crusaders had fought for over 200 years. Finally, the Sultan laid siege to Jerusalem and offered a peaceful handover of the city. The Crusaders tried to defend it, but Salahuddin's engineers managed to collapse the eastern wall. Despite this success, Salahuddin did not order his troops to enter the city that day. The inhabitants of the city feared that the next day would bring slaughter and looting. In this chaos, even elderly women cut the hair of the younger women to make them less attractive to the soldiers, hoping to prevent them from being taken as slaves. The next day, Balian, the commander of the city, and the Pope agreed to surrender. When they approached Salahuddin, the Sultan pointed to the crack in the wall and said, "How can a conquered city decide the terms of surrender?" But Balian and the Pope threatened to kill 5,000 Muslims inside the fort and destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Salahuddin could not afford this, so he agreed to a peace agreement that promised if the Crusader forces surrendered peacefully, all civilians would be spared upon ransom. On October 2, 1187, the agreement on the surrender of Jerusalem was signed. The city, which had been captured by the Crusaders in 1099, returned to Muslim control after 88 years. Coincidentally, it was the 27th of Rajab, the night of Isra and Mi'raj, the night of Ascension, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is believed to have visited Jerusalem. Sultan Salahuddin entered the city with grace, marking the second time a Muslim leader had entered Jerusalem peacefully after Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He ordered the installation of the mimbar or pulpit that Sultan Nuruddin Zangi had built for Al-Aqsa Mosque, where it remained for 782 years. As per the agreement with the Crusaders, each person had to pay a ransom to leave the city peacefully. 10 dirhams for men, 5 dirhams for women, and 1 dirham for children, with a 40-day time limit set for this process. Historian Jonathan Phillips wrote that Salahuddin's conduct during the conquest of Jerusalem disproved the Western propaganda against him. Thousands of Christians who could not pay the ransom were freed. Salahuddin and his brother Saifuddin personally covered the costs. Many were allowed to leave without any ransom at all. Jonathan Phillips, in his book The Life and Legend of the Sultan Salahuddin, noted that the Christians of Jerusalem did not face the brutal treatment they had feared. When the news of Jerusalem's fall reached Europe, it caused a lot of frustration and anger among the people. Even Pope Urban III died within a few days of hearing the news. Europe decided to reclaim their holy land, so they declared a new war. In 1189, all of Europe again for the third time rallied to Jerusalem. French King Philip II, English King Richard the Lionheart, and German King Frederick Barbarossa assembled a joint army to lead the Third Crusade, this war also known as the War of Kings. Initially, the Crusaders achieved some success, capturing Cyprus and several coastal cities. At that time, Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi's army was exhausted from prolonged warfare, so he decided to handle the attack with guerrilla tactics. They engaged the Crusaders in hit-and-run strategies and were quite successful. The Crusader army struggled with the harsh Middle Eastern heat and the cold, because before they reached, Sultan Salahuddin tactically destroyed all the forts, leaving them without shelter. Additionally, Salahuddin disrupted their food supply, making it increasingly difficult for them to continue. Despite the Crusaders' efforts over 2 years, they failed to achieve their strategic goals. During the campaign, German King Frederick Barbarossa died, and the German army further decided to retreat. But King Richard the Lionheart of England continued his struggle. Though soon he came to know that his brother John Lackland revolted against him, and he took advantage of Richard's absence to conspire against him, attempting to seize control of the English throne. So on the 2nd of September 1192, Richard and Salahuddin agreed to the Treaty of Jaffa, which concluded the Third Crusade. The treaty allowed for a 3-year truce, permitting Christian pilgrims access to the holy sites in Jerusalem while the city remained under Muslim control. This compromise was seen as a pragmatic solution given the prolonged stalemate. On October 9, 1192, Richard the Lionheart finally returned to England. Just 5 months later, on March 11, 1193, at the age of 55, Sultan Salahuddin Al Ayyubi, the Mujahid of Islam and conqueror of Jerusalem, died in Damascus. Muslims lost their brave commander. He was buried near the principal mosque of Damascus. When he died, his empire consisted of Egypt, Palestine, Yemen, Syria, Hijaz, and Iraq. However, after his death, his empire did not last long. Within 60 years, the Ayyubid Empire was abolished, but the city of Bait al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, which he had conquered, remained under Muslim control for 700 years. On December 11, 1917, British forces under the command of General Edmund Allenby entered Jerusalem through the Jaffa Gate, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule. Shortly after, in July 1920, during World War I, French forces captured Damascus, and General Henry Gouraud visited Salahuddin's tomb. He's reported to have kicked the tomb and said, "Awake, Salahuddin, we have returned. My presence here consecrates the victory of the cross over the crescent." Even 700 years later, Salahuddin's legacy was still strong. It continued to influence and overshadow his enemies. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish agency, proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. Until now, Muslims are still struggling to reclaim their holy land. They are looking for another Salahuddin. Salahuddin is a hero to Muslims, not just because he conquered the holy city, but also due to his efforts to develop a progressive Islamic state, his love for Islamic knowledge, his devotion to Islam, and his exemplary conduct. In his era, where other emperors and commanders focused on making their lives comfortable by gathering material wealth, Salahuddin defined his purpose in life differently. He focused on the well-being of Islamic society and took action to spread Islamic knowledge and culture. His mission was to serve Muslims and ensure that when he presented himself to Allah in the afterlife, Allah would be pleased with him. Even before his death, he says, "There is nothing left for me to bequeath to anyone except my horse and my sword." His heart was solely in love with Islam and Allah. Salahuddin's purpose and acts have kept his memory alive until now. Despite being a powerful and successful leader, his humility and devotion to Islam remind us of our ancestors in Islam. He has such an influence on Muslims that even today, when Muslims pray for Bait al-Maqdis, they often say, "O Allah, bless us with another Salahuddin who reclaimed our holy land." His strong devotion to Islam and his great character are lessons for all of us. His life shows the importance of integrity, humility, and seeking justice. By following his example, he can find the motivation to become exemplary Muslims. His consistent character and teachings helped spread Islam far and wide. Let's carry forward his spirit, using his life as a beacon to guide our own, and continue to spread the values of Islam with the same fervor and commitment.